Well, hello out there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining from, whether you're joining us live or on the replay. I thank you so much for being here. This is going to be a packed with information LinkedIn Live session for sure. Again, welcome to the Smarter Career Moves LinkedIn Live show. My guest today is Julie Jansen, and you know, Julie, I met you several years ago at a SHRM meeting. You were speaking, I believe, at the time. And since then, I have heard you speak many times. You're a very engaging speaker. You have two books. We're going to talk about one. I have them both on my shelf. And I'm really excited, of course, to have you here with me today. So for anyone who doesn't know you, tell us a little bit about who you are and kind of what you do.
Sure. And it's great to see you, Annette. I know we go way back. It's wonderful. So just briefly, for 20 plus years, I have helped people navigate the workplace through executive coaching and speaking. And then I also help people identify jobs, change careers. I'm also a writer of LinkedIn profiles and resumes, and as Annette mentioned, a couple books. And I just recently became a vocational expert about 4 years ago for divorces. So I do vocational evaluations and sometimes testify in court. So that's my background.
Well, I didn't know that about you. That sounds like really exciting and fun. So, before we dive into our conversation, I want to say, if you're out there in the audience, please do say hello. Tell us where you're coming from, just so we know that we're live and everything is going well. If you have comments, please do, or questions for Julie, please do put them in the chat. We can see that back here in the studio, and I'm sure Julie would be kind enough to answer your questions. So, this session really is about executive presence. And, you've been coaching people to be more successful since I met you. Your specialties include the, executive presence and leadership and communications and all of that. But I'd like to focus on executive presence. And before I ask you about how people can develop their own, what is executive presence? Because I'm not sure people understand exactly what that is.
Yeah, it sounds rather lofty. Well, let me start with what it isn't.
Okay.
So it's not first impressions. It's not abilities. It's not even content, really. What it is, well, knowledge and experience are important, of course. Executive presence is more about consistent, long-lasting, positive impressions that are created over time by the way that someone expresses themselves and the way they engage with others. And a person with executive presence can immediately command attention by the way they carry themselves and communicate. They can voice their ideas or beliefs, even if someone contradicts them. And then just to quote an author who wrote a book about executive presence, Sylvia Ann Hewlett, she said very simply, how you speak, how you act, and how you look and how you act carries much more weight than the other two.
Yeah, it sounds a lot like a personal brand. I guess the two are kind of interrelated, right? I mean,
yes,
the executive presence can be part of your personal brand. So, how does executive presence, because you think of it as, it has executive presence,
right?
And how does that tie into someone's leadership abilities? How does that executive presence influence their leadership abilities?
Yeah. So developing executive presence, Annette, it transforms managers into respected leaders, really. So people want to be led by someone who exhibits poise and confidence and consistent behavior, someone who communicates clearly and impactfully, someone who's skilled at persuading and influencing and who has a professional image. And those all kind of sum up what a leader is. It's someone that people want to, quote unquote, follow and work for.
Yeah, as I'm listening to you talk about that, it sounds like a lot of it is related to just the idea of having that certainty and confidence that I'm going to ask you a little bit about more later, that is going to make people want to follow you because you exude that, little something, which I guess is the executive presence.
Yeah.
And so, it would seem also that executive presence is certainly very much tied to career advancement. I mean, if communication is so important, and as you mentioned, it's a lot of what you present, how you present yourself. And I know there's a study, I never remember the figures, that there is a verbal, the words that you say, the tone of your voice,
Yeah.
and then your body language and everything related to that. And it's really the words that you speak are not as don't have as much of an impact on people as
It's what it is that if your nonverbal contradicts your verbal,
Mhm.
people are always going to believe the nonverbal. So if you were like interviewing me and looking disinterestedly in the background all the time, people would say, oh, that she's not interested in doing this interview, kind of thing, and it's interesting that that's true. And I can totally see why. So, so your question is really, about career advancement and sort of my
Yes.
take on that.
Yes.
So I think that one of the most, and I mentioned it briefly earlier, Annette, one of the most significant elements of effective leadership is truly the ability to influence, to shape, and positively affect the outcome of situations, in particular, probably crisis or change situations. And by developing executive presence, you can actually transform any self-doubt you have and uncertainty into self-assurance and energy and the conviction to successfully navigate if it's a corporate landscape or an advance in your career, or if you're a supplier or a vendor or a partner, the same goes for you. You don't have to be an employee to have that executive presence.
So talk to me a little bit, because we have a wide variety, an audience for this show. Talk to me a little bit about how that works for career advancement in sort of that corporate setting. I know that many times people think, well, if I keep my head down and I work really hard, people are going to recognize me, and that's all I need.
Yeah,
But that's not true.
If I had we're not going to be making money that much longer, but nickels and dimes. If I had a nickel or a dime for every time I've heard that, Annette, it's so true. I wince a little bit. I think that might be true for the first year of your career. How hard you work and how you meet deadlines and things like that, and then that rapidly kind of goes away and dissipates. So, so the earlier on, and if are you interested in some actual tips for?
Sure. Yes, that's my next question. So if you want to move right into that, that's great.
It's a nice segue because people who are early career often ask that question. Well, how do I develop executive presence? I've heard about it. I know it seems important, but so I have, and I know you're going to segue nicely into the next topic, but I have 4 tips really. The first is work on strengthening your confidence by being assertive, by taking risks, and by constantly learning. And the more you work on your confidence, and Annette, I can easily say there are moments where I don't have confidence. When it's something new or something I don't feel as equipped to do, and I have to work on it, and I'm sure you do too at times. The second thing is kind of about communication, which is speak up. Even if you don't think you have anything to say, ask questions, be a regular contributor. And if off the cuff communication is challenging for you, as it is for many people, prepare bullet points for meetings. Because the more you prepare, you don't want to over prepare, but the more comfortable you're going to feel about communicating and asking questions. And then just as important, if not more so, listen better. So listening to other people's opinions and remarks before you speak your mind can bring great benefits. And then finally, this one's tricky. Develop emotional control. So poise is valued by people, and calmness creates a sense of trust and comfort. As a highly emotional person myself, I'm challenged with this quite often. Controlling your emotions, though, allows the rational part of your brain to think through critical situations and process information logically, and it helps with decision making. So those are my 4, sort of core areas that I think one should work on early on and moving forward.
I love the idea of listening, and I'm like that too. I get very excited. I'm always so happy to have people on the
You
show.
are.
I tend to, fall over my words because I'm just having I'm so excited to be here with, you and the other guests I have on my show. But one of the things that really hit me when you're talking about the communication and the listening, because I think people I agree, they just they don't listen. As someone is asking them a question, they are already formulating the answer in their mind before
Yes.
the question is done.
Yes. It's if you have a quick mind or you're concerned or nervous about what your response will be or having the right response, or you know it already and you've heard the same thing over and over again. I mean, there's a variety of reasons. I'm a big interrupter. So I have to constantly say to myself, don't interrupt, Julie, don't interrupt. And I can blame it on, rationalize it as enthusiasm, which in part is true. However, it's not a professional behavior. And I'm well aware of that, so I'm constantly working on that. We all know what our impediment is to appropriate listening. And people do tend to pay more attention to and respect someone who's doing less talking, and because then whatever comes out of their mouth is going to sound much more like a gem of wisdom.
Yeah, I love that. That's like that saying, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, to listen more and speak less. And I think that is true. And I'd also like to touch back a little bit on the whole idea of the confidence. And I think, as you say, we all suffer from that. And we have that little voice in our head. My little voice is never saying, Annette, you are rocking it. You are go girl. You are just doing
right.
something.
Right.
It's always something critical of,
I know that's true.
Do that or whatever. So what do you have some tips that you can give to, sort of quell that whole part of it?
Well, I think if I were to define, this is just Julie Jansen's definition of confidence, so it's not gospel necessarily, but it's an unshakable belief in yourself based on, and this is important, a realistic understanding of one's circumstances. So that realism and that realistic perspective has to kick in. So it's not just about you, it's about what's happening around you and other people's behavior. And that can kind of, level it out a little bit and make you feel a little bit more confident. But I think confidence just, it comes with time and experience, of course. It also, I had mentioned a little bit earlier, taking some risks. I'm not saying jump off a mountain or out of an airplane, but, do something that you've never done before or you don't think you'll like. And you'll often be surprised at how that will bolster your confidence. And I'm a big fan of a fan club, so we all have our fan clubs.
Yes.
When you're feeling that, like, just, text or Slack someone and say, oh, I'm just feeling nervous about this. And that person's going to say, you got it. You're great. You're awesome. And so, and I think there's psychological things too, like breathing and pausing, and just kind of like this morning, I found out that I lost 20 plus years of files, and I was really like, and then I just kind of mellowed. I do have a backup service, but I don't know if they backed up my old computer versus my new, blah, 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 blah. So I have to deal with that later. And I'm just like, you got this, you're going to figure this out. You got it. Don't, and a lot of self-talk with confidence issues and with stress issues, I would say.
It's funny that you, well, not funny. I mean, it is, I understand how that can happen, but I am right now having a problem with my email, and I am not getting, I'm sending completed projects to clients, and they're not getting them.
Yeah.
So I am going through having my email sort of switched over, and it's not working here and it's not working there. But, you're right. You have to just kind of let that stuff go,
and remind yourself that you've handled these things before, maybe not exactly like this, but it will end. It will resolve at some point.
So I mentioned earlier that you've written a couple of books. I have them both on my bookshelf, and this is the one. Here's it is. One of them is I don't know what I want to do, but I know it's not this, which is a career development. It's a step by
Yeah.
step guide. And this is the other one. You want me to work with who about dealing with difficult people. And of course I've read them both, but before our conversation today, I was looking at this one because, the whole idea of executive presence, I think, is something that can help you, dealing with these
Yeah.
difficult people. Certainly the confidence in yourself and sort of your knowledge, your value, what you bring to the table, however you want to frame that. And, we could certainly have a 2-hour session just talking about the books, but I notice in this one that you identify 5 difficult people. And one is the poor communicator and the person who doesn't listen, as we were just talking about, the disrespectful person who is that's kind of, you talked about bullying there, the rigid person, someone who's unyielding and unwilling to compromise, the no common sense real reinventor. And it's so funny too. A lot of the clients that I work with, one of their skills is the fact that they are not someone who reinvents the wheel. They
Yeah.
just, they may adapt, but they don't take the time to do that. And then the dysfunctional decision maker, the person who makes the poor decisions. And you identify 11 keys into how to get along with anyone. And I'd like to ask you about 4 to start, and then we can go on to if you think there are others that are important to
Sure.
bring up as part of our conversation. And the first one is confidence. And I think we talked a lot. You shared a lot about confidence,
Yeah.
developing the confidence.
Yeah.
And the second one is flexibility. And how is that helpful? How do you develop that, and how does that help in dealing with these people that
Yeah.
you're not getting along with so well?
Yeah, I mean, flexibility is really sort of like a quality of character that allows you to accept change and make suitable adjustments to accommodate the change. I mean, that's kind of how I look at flexibility. And people, I would argue, and I don't have empirical evidence or research about this, but I would argue that people seem to be just sort of wired one way or another from an early age, where we all have that one relative or that one friend or who just doesn't like change, doesn't want to do anything different, won't eat anything different, won't, whatever it is. And
Yep.
we certainly encounter that at work with people as well. So, and I think that, I mean, people don't like to do things differently because if you look at change, could be a sense of loss, or it feels too uncertain and ambiguous, so they don't know how to handle it. And there's some level of discomfort usually for the person, and that's why they aren't as flexible perhaps. So I think what I do in the book, and that, as you know, is I kind of take those 11 keys and I say, well, if you're lacking flexibility, excuse me, here's some keys that you could elevate in order to overcome that. So with flexibility, you could just force yourself to become more curious. That's one of my keys, curiosity. You can work really hard at being optimistic and saying, well, if I try that new thing, it actually could be better. You can be empathetic towards other people, and that would kind of pull you out of, let you think about other people and why they want to do whatever it is that you don't want to do. I think you always need a sense of humor. That probably goes with all the keys. And then finally, and I know you're going to ask me about this one, but there's self-awareness. And self-awareness is foundationally the most important. The reason I'm asked to executive coach people by companies, number one, is that the person lacks self-awareness on some level.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure of that. And people stay, at least what I've read, if people stay in a bad situation, let's say they're in a work environment, because at least they know. They
Yeah.
know it. And there
It's,
is
I say the evil you know, which is sort of very dire sounding, but it is. It's even though it's terribly negative, you're right. It's still what they know. Yeah. So
and there's this idea that whole that jumping from the frying pan into the fire, and people think about that. And I've always been pretty good about embracing change, and I've had a lot of twists and turns in my career. And
I would say that's true of you, definitely.
but it's certainly something I think people sometimes think, at least I have thought, that flexibility might be age related, and yet I know some younger people that
Yeah.
are not as flexible as older. So I think like a lot of these things, people may initially think of
Assumptions.
them as assumptions. Yes, of course, those assumptions that the woman with the gray hair at the Apple store doesn't know as much as the kid with the young kid with the pink hair, but that's not necessarily so.
No, not at all. I mean, and it's not true. I mean, if someone doesn't have a sense of humor when they're 10, they might not have a sense of humor when they're 55. I mean, it's a lot of these are kind of woven into personality traits in a way.
Yeah.
Although I always am hesitant to say, because you can't really change your personality, but you can change your behavior. So I'm always a little nervous about saying that.
No, well, that's okay. I'll say it for you. So one of the things, but a lot of the assessments, like the Myers-Briggs, the MBTI, the Enneagram, a lot of
Yeah,
those are built around the idea that you do have we do have these traits, character traits, whatever. And I think of that as being sort of the same type of thing as having bias. And we all have our bias against this, that,
absolutely.
or the other thing, based on our experience, or the people around us, or whatever that may be. And I think the best way to address any of them is to be aware.
And to not be shy about asking for feedback. And that's something actually I should have mentioned earlier, is learn how to, I do a lot of group coaching sessions on how to accept and act upon feedback for early career people. And it's not easy because you're always nervous about that negative piece of feedback you'll get, but you decide if it's important or not, and then you decide what you're going to do about it.
So, well, I'm glad that you brought that up. And before I move on to the next key that I want to ask you about, do you have any like suggestions? Because I think while it is difficult to accept feedback, it's also difficult to give feedback.
Yeah.
So, tips? Do you have some tips for?
Yeah. I mean, I think giving feedback needs to be entirely about business results, so tying anything to business results and thinking about how it is impacting your goals, your clients' goals, the organizational objectives or whatever, is not, oh, this person does something that irritates me or that other people complain about, so it has to be, what I'm trying to say, it needs to be very relevant, and you need to think it through. And I'm always a fan of scripting it out. What am I going to say to Annette when I give her this feedback? And doing it in a way that's helpful. And so often I hear my clients say, my manager gave me feedback. Yesterday I was coaching people all day. My manager gave me feedback about something, and it wasn't helpful. I didn't understand it, that she didn't have an example. I don't even know why she mentioned it. It almost seemed like she just felt like she had to say something, and so it's being really thoughtful about giving the person examples, giving the person tangible, practical tips for how they might change, because you can't say to someone, you need to be more strategic.
Yeah,
and then
right.
walk away, and that person's like, what does that mean?
I know. What does it mean? Yeah. It's so important. So, I do want to delve into that self-awareness, because I think that is, as you say, it's sort of the foundation of
It is.
everything. But what about the idea of respect? You're talking about, just respect for others, respect for yourself, commanding respect. If you can talk a little bit about how that ties into the one of these
I mean,
keys.
I think, you mentioned bullying, and see, I interrupted you. I told you I'm an interrupter.
That's okay.
You mentioned bullying, and that's a very extreme type of disrespect, of course. But I think I just, it's not a religion or anything, but the golden rule: do unto others as you would have others do unto you.
Yes.
And people who are disrespectful and then they receive the same type of behavior, I mean, it's really like good manners, expressing thanks and recognition. It's keeping your word, being honest and transparent, not blaming other people, being kind, listening, behaving professionally, and appreciating differences. I see those as the bullets that align with respect. And I have lots of funny stories, like whenever I speak in front of a live audience again, right? I don't know if you've done that yet, but after COVID, but one of my favorite stories is this gentleman that I worked with, who at the time was considerably older than me. And we would have a Monday morning team meeting in New York City. And he would, believe it or not, he would clip his fingernails every Monday morning in the meeting. And they would go flying and everybody would like cover their cup. And he was such a nice guy. He had so many saving grace skills. He was wonderful, but his name was Jim. And, but nobody had the nerve to tell him, like, that's not respectful to be clipping your nails.
Oh my God.
And it's kind of funny and kind of gross, but it's an example of, like, there's so many ways you don't even realize that you're being disrespectful sometimes,
Yeah. But the thing is, people hold back on things like that.
They do.
They don't want to hurt somebody's feelings.
It feels personal.
But the thing is that it's really helpful to the person. I mean, imagine if, he was in a meeting with, I don't know, a client, if that was what he was doing. And, I find even very little things, and this is kind of a minor thing, but if I've had people point out to me, I looked at your LinkedIn profile and I see you have a typo there, you have an error there, and I hope that you take this.
Yeah.
It's meant. And of course, it's much appreciated, because it's so much, if you see something, of course, try to approach it the right way. But, if you see something that can be hindering somebody, think of it as doing them a service rather than.
Yes, exactly. And then, there's so many things in between the clipping of the nails and hitting someone,
Yeah.
There's lots of things in between, and I think inherently people know and understand what respect means, but either they were, raised a certain way, socialized a certain way. They had role models that whatever they did, and they think it's fine. Or there's so many things that go into the mix of not being respectful. So it's just kind of always stepping back and being very carefully thinking about the words that come out of your mouth and then, as executive president, your actions.
Yes. A lot of that, I think, too, is we hear that phrase, you got to walk the talk, right? I mean, and it's so true. You hear leaders, maybe it might be your manager, it might be leaders of wherever, and they're saying one thing, this is important, this is et cetera, and yet their actions don't really show that. And one of the things is, I was talking to somebody recently about priorities. If you're talking to your team about these are our priorities, and yet everything that you are doing is something else, then it's a mismatch.
It is. It's what you were saying earlier. It's always about actions first, whether it's nonverbal or whether it's the way someone's behaving. It's contradictory, and that's what people will believe.
So I'd love to delve in a little bit more, if we can talk a little bit more about the whole idea of self-awareness, because I can certainly see that as being a problem for people. I think it's a problem for all of us. There are so many things that we don't recognize. How can we become more self-aware ourselves?
Well, so you know that I like to always start with the definition. So
Yeah, no, I love that.
it's my most complex key of the 11 for sure. It's the most, as you point out, Annette, it's definitely the most difficult to develop and increase. And I feel like if I finish an executive coaching engagement and the only feedback the person gives me whom I've coached is, Julie, I started to say this, or I started to do this, and I saw you in my head, and I stopped and I realized, then I say, Julie, job well done. That's that means a lot. So it involves knowing and understanding many aspects of yourself, and how they relate to other people. And it's a big part of emotional intelligence, which most people know. Most people know what emotional intelligence is. The meaning of your appraisals and your actions, your wants, your intentions, your goals, your attitudes, all of that kind of goes into the mix. And it's definitely the master key, because without self-awareness, it would be impossible to develop any of my other 10 keys, really. And it's tricky. So, obviously we talked about feedback a little bit, Annette, but get into a regular habit of asking people for feedback, but not just, Annette, how'd you like this interview today? But Annette, how well did I describe how to develop, we didn't really talk about how to be more flexible actually, but the definition of flexibility, or how well did I do at X, Y, and Z? That's the kind of feedback you're looking for. Attaboys are nice. They feel good, and they last about 10 seconds, and they're not helpful. So I'm all about helpful, so I think, in the segue to how do you develop it? Well, you ask for feedback and you decide what to act on, and you actually act on it. And if you don't know how to act on it, then you find someone who is good at whatever that is and ask them to coach you, or to, mentor you, or to kind of give you some tips. That's definitely one.
So, I'm sorry, did you want to go on?
Oh, I can if you want. I felt like I was dominating. So
no. You're
okay.
here
So yeah, and then
not me.
and so again, because my keys are all associated with each other. Confidence is being confident. They're all aligned. Is what keeps you on track to believe in yourself and your abilities, especially when you're getting uncomfortable feedback. Once again, curiosity. If you're curious to learn more about yourself and learn more about how or why people do or don't connect with you, instead of just saying, which is something I often hear, well, that's just who I am. Yeah, my wife has told me that for 20 years, It's like, well, wait a minute, aren't you, sort of curious about how it impacts?
Maybe it's my ex-wife told me that for 20 years.
Yeah, usually it's that. That's true. And if decisiveness, one of my keys, if you don't decide you want to change your behavior and increase your self-awareness, it won't happen. Being willing, which goes into the flexibility key, being willing to change, being flexible about it, saying, I know it might be a little painful sometimes, but it's important. And then, of course, being able to laugh at yourself. I mean, the only humor we can use now is that's not self-deprecating, but self-effacing humor. So, I didn't make fun of myself enough today, but I like to try to make fun of myself so that people will laugh at that. And knowing that I obviously am confident. Intelligence is, that's the kind of the no wheel common sense, not having common sense, not managing your time well, that stuff is important. And then just being able to look at yourself in a positive light, optimistically, and instead of saying, I can never do that. I can never change. That won't work. Persevering, of course, is important. And then finally, if you're respectful to others, and that's important to you to be respectful, then you're going to want to increase your self-awareness, because unfortunately, the final thing I have to say about that is that the most of the behaviors that I'm asked to coach people, they're high potential, they're talented, but whatever their behaviors are can sometimes be perceived as disrespectful. Mm-hmm. They don't mean it usually, but it comes across that way.
So
Yeah, I would think so. I would think so. And um, so I wanted to ask you a little bit about your speaking, because I know you speak all the time. You speak on a lot of different topics. So what's your favorite topic to speak on, and why?
oh, wow. I have no idea. That's an interesting question. I mean, I do love this topic of executive presence, and sometimes I call it executive leadership, and sometimes I call it leadership behavior, I mean, I think I really love my keys, but I find that it's hard to give a speech about them because you have to kind of there's so many and people get overwhelmed. Like when I do media interviews and that they're like, well, 11, that's so many, wait a minute,
Yeah.
what's more important, So I love my keys because I govern my life and my existence in the way I behave based on my keys. And I know which ones I'm weak at. I know which ones I overuse, because you can overuse the key too. Like someone who jokes around all the time to mask something,
Mhm.
and so I love that. I love executive presence. And I do like the topic of my first book, the I Don't Know What I Want, but I Know It's Not This, a step-by-step guide to finding gratifying work, long mouthful. Just about hit 100,000 copies sold. And I'm really psyched about that. Even though it came out, it's a third edition. I pitched it to Penguin for a next edition, and during COVID, and they very graciously declined. They said, we don't do new editions anymore in publishing. So I thought that was interesting.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
I love that topic because I love helping people like realize, you know what, you don't have to do the same thing your entire life. You can change and grow and be different, So I kind of like all of it.
So what do you enjoy most about what you do with the coaching? I think you touched on this a little bit earlier, but what's the one thing when you're coaching these clients that just, gets you most excited?
That they feel motivated and confident, and that they say to me, you're so motivating, you're so energizing, you're so, I'm very direct, which gets me in trouble sometimes, particularly in my personal life. But I'm kind and honest, and I like to tell people like it is so that it helps them, and that if I walk away and say I helped that person, it honestly brings me to tears. It really does.
Well, you can't see it, but you're getting lots of applause here.
Oh,
So I said, people, we're not getting a lot of comments, but you're getting lots of applause from the audience. So we appreciate that. And I am also a very direct, and that's why the potential clients that I speak with, I'm not for everyone, because I am not a soft, gentle, I'm not mean, but I'm not that soft, gentle, holding your hands. I'm going to, tell you what I see and be pretty direct about it. So, and that's something that I actually see that as a good thing.
But you also have a warm style. You're warm. I've always found you very warm.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah. I mean, I don't, being direct has nothing to do with being a meanie or, I mean, and at the end of the day, even if it's painful for someone to hear, usually, I always joke with people when they have a tough manager or if someone's a tough manager and they get that feedback, and I say to them, mark my words, in 10 years, that person's going to get in touch with you and say, you were the best manager I ever had. You were the toughest, but you were, and it provided the person's, respectful and
yes.
But yeah, and it's so true. It's like appreciated usually later, not at the moment.
So what is something that would surprise about you that would surprise people?
Well, I mean, I have a lot of really weird personal things. I don't know professionally. I mean, I just found out that my biological father is alive, and he's 99 years old last year. Through 23andMe, I was adopted, and I didn't think he knew I existed. He does not know I existed. I did find my biological mother, who kept me a secret and, didn't tell me the truth about the fact that my father was alive. So that's like a doozy. And I, had a very challenging young life. People always look at me and say, oh, you make it look easy, but it's like, no, it's actually made me who I am today, and I don't share personal things, as you know, in that openly, but COVID has kind of pushed me in that direction to be more open about doing that.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah.
And there's a phrase that it's not mine, but I can never remember who told it to me in the first place, that when you're sharing, and I think a lot of that about like LinkedIn, and because I'm active there, I know you're active there, that
Yeah.
there's really kind of the professional and the personal and the private. And,
Yeah.
And there's some people that really, I mean, they share.
Yeah.
But that doesn't work for me. And yet
Me neither.
but I do, find that if I share something that might be personal, my own personal experience, not something that, I wouldn't want anybody to know, or it's just only my very closest friends,
Right.
that it's a learning experience for others, that it can be helpful. So I think of it that way.
Yeah. I mean, I'm with you. I definitely have strong boundaries, and it's only because I know you. I've known you. Like if you were someone interviewing me who I didn't know, I might not have shared that. I don't know, but it's kind of, and I find it kind of interesting. And there's a lot of adopted people out there. So yeah.
My mom
was adopted. Yeah. Interesting.
And it's funny because I have connected, and she has connected with people through ancestry.com.
Yeah.
That happened with one of my cousins also. And we never knew until everyone was an adult. And, it's very interesting how, people's lives. And I think it is all what makes us who we are. And they say if you go back and change one thing, it changes everything.
Yeah, I would believe that. Definitely.
So,
yeah.
So my last question for you is kind of, when did you know that you wanted to be an executive coach, or when did you know that that was the fit for you?
I never knew that, actually. I was working in sales, selling what I now deliver. And I was talking to a colleague whom I didn't know very well, and she was a little bit more mature than I. And she said, I said, oh, I'm bored. I don't want to be in sales anymore. And she said, well, Julie, you give all these free speeches to, sell what we're selling, And I said, oh, yeah. And she said, why don't you become a speaker? And I said, well, I didn't even know that was a profession. I was in my 30s. And then I found National Speakers Association. And then people used to walk up to me and say, do you coach? And like an idiot for years, I said, no. And then I said, why am I saying no? So I started coaching. So it wasn't like I grew up. Actually, my fantasy job was always to be a futurist. That's my fantasy job. And my second fantasy job is to be mayor of a medium-sized town or city. Those are my two fantasy jobs.
Okay.
But what I do is awesome. As you can probably tell, I love it. And this is very energizing talking to you, Annette. So I appreciate that.
Well, this has been a fabulous time. So as we are getting to the end, I just want to ask you, is there anything that, I haven't asked you, that we haven't discussed, that you think would be important to mention?
I just think it's important to know it's never too late, and it's never too early for anything that you want to develop or change or improve, or it's just you just look at the world through the lens of possibility and opportunity. And I mean, it's not that you would have asked me a question about that, but that's just sort of a very important message, that we all have rough times. We all have hard things in our lives. We all do. There's nobody who's exempt from that, and those things affect you, yes, but you are your biggest advocate. And you can do it no matter what it is, and not to sound like a motivational speaker, but I really believe it.
Well, you kind of are, though.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
So thank you. I mean, thank you again. I know people can find you on LinkedIn. They can find you on your website if they want to connect with you. And are you open to connecting with people on LinkedIn?
Of course. I embrace it.
You never know. I always like to ask. So
Yeah,
again, I thank you so much for being here
thank
with
you,
me today.
Annette.
It's been such a joy to sit here. I don't think we've ever had like a conversation like
We
this
haven't.
before. And
It's always passing, ships passing.
it's really been fun for me, and I know you shared a lot of great information. So thank you to everyone who's been here with us. We've seen your reactions from the audience, and we really appreciate you being here. And have a great rest of your day.
Bye, everyone. Bye.